Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
I'm Sahir. I am a mother of 2 small children. I'm based up in Glasgow. I'm also currently the interim project manager for a lovely little charity called Women on Wheels that encourages women to get into cycling. And last year I completed my first big adventure, which was cycling from Glasgow to Istanbul.
What were your early years like?
I grew up in a household with my mum, my younger brother and my grandparents and my uncle as well. So this was a classic sort of Pakistani extended family setup. My mum and dad got divorced when I was very young, so I never knew my dad or his side of the family. So it was a really loving, busy household. I was very lucky to have all these adults around, and it was very much a Pakistani household, you know. So my grandparents were first generation immigrants. My first language, because I grew up in a house with them, was Urdu, which is the language of Pakistan. We listened to Pakistani music and ate Pakistani food. My gran cooked every day, you know, a different curry. So it was a really lovely childhood, but not outdoorsy, I would say. That kind of culture is not particularly encouraging of people getting out and about and camping and being dirty or any of those things. My first exposure to that whole world came when my mum encouraged me to do the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, and my school at the time didn't offer it. I know lots of schools now do it within school time, but she actually went off and found an open award centre, it was called, in the sort of neighbouring suburb of Glasgow, and used to drive me and my friends there every week, you know, for hours. We would go and do our training. So she's a teacher, so she was very aware of how valuable kind of that Duke of Edinburgh's Award is in terms of extracurricular for university admission and other things. So that was her motivation to get me to do it. And sort of by the by, because the expedition element of it is compulsory, I found myself suddenly learning how to navigate using a map or carry all my stuff in wild camp and things that I've never ever done before. And I absolutely loved it. But that was my first exposure to the world of any kind of outdoor adventure.
How amazing is your mum to go to that extra effort, actually? Because like with the time involved, the driving, having to find an open award centre to go there, because she knew the benefits that you would get from that.
I think it is remarkable. And she herself, and this is no criticism of my grandparents, but just the culture they came from, and lots of first generation immigrants of the same generation were exactly the same. You know, they didn't teach their daughters how to swim. You know, they felt that was immodest. Or my mum wasn't allowed to play the violin because that meant she had to stay at school after school hours, and they were nervous about that. Yeah, there's lots of things that she kind of wasn't allowed to do, which I guess boys of her background and generation were. And now things have moved on hugely, but she was really keen that her children, and particularly me, maybe as her daughter, was able to do all the things that she wasn't. So yeah, huge credit to her really for being forward-thinking enough and open-minded enough to, you know, let me and encourage me and find ways for me to do things that she wasn't able to.
Because I was even just thinking, actually, like divorce as well for your mum's generation, was that seen as quite taboo as well?
I would say yes. It was much more difficult for her than it was for me. You know, it was less accepted. It was sort of, I guess, considered much more of a calamity and a disaster in those days. It's like, right, well, your life is over in some ways. And of course it wasn't. But yes, she overcame an awful lot.
What a role model. What an absolute powerhouse. Is she still with you?
She is. Yes, she is. She lives in just outside Glasgow, the same house that I grew up in. So it's lovely to have her nearby.
That's so lovely. And she must be so proud of you as well, like and what you're doing now, and especially in the world of cycling and the encouragement that you're doing with Women on Wheels.
I think she thinks I'm a bit mad. She thinks I'm a bit crazy. And when I tell her I want to do these things, she always, she does worry an awful lot, and she can't help it. You know, she is on one hand, I think, really proud and kind of, admires the get up and go, I've got to do these things. But on the other hand, she's, you know, as any mum is, they worry about their children, and she does think I'm completely crazy.
But you also know it's coming from a place of love and just love and caring and just wanting to protect you. With your cycling, do you remember like the first time you got on a bike? Was that through family or friends? When did that happen?
It's interesting you asked that. I very recently did a cycle trainer course with Cycling Scotland as part of my work, where, you learn how to teach other people how to cycle. And the trainer was saying, oh, we all remember our first experience on a bike, don't we? We all remember how we were taught. And actually, I thought, no, I really don't remember when I was taught to cycle, who taught me to cycle. I do remember in my childhood learning how to cycle, and it quite possibly was my uncle, or it could have been my mum. And we definitely were bought bikes as children. And I remember doing my cycling proficiency test, as it was called then, at school, and learning how to cycle safely on the road and do hand signals and all of that. But cycling was not in any way a big or even a medium sort of part of my childhood. And even in early adulthood, I could ride a bike. When I went to university, I used a bike to, get around between lectures and halls and things, but everyone did that there. So that was completely normal. I was much more actually into hiking, in terms of outdoor adventures and things. The Duke of Edinburgh's award was all about hiking. So that's what I got into. And I spent lots of time in my 20s really doing various long distance footpaths. Cycling came later, and it came about through reading of other people's adventures. So Dervla Murphy, particularly, I just picked up her book. I was a big armchair traveller actually all my life. I'm a big reader. And her book, Full Tilt, From Ireland to India on a on a bicycle, I absolutely loved. It's her diary basically of this, at that time, absolutely insane thing she did, which was get on her bike in the 1960s, actually a couple of years difference from when my granddad actually emigrated from Pakistan to the UK. So, this was a long time ago, pre-Google Maps, pre the internet, pre-smartphones, and she just took off. I think she had a gun on her. She didn't have a tent, completely badass thing to do. And I remember reading about her adventure and thinking, okay, so you can get a lot further on a bike then than you can walking in less time. It just sounded really exciting and like a different kind of adventure. And I really wanted to do that.
So how did you decide on what sort of cycle adventure that you were going to do? Did you think, okay, I'm going to do a couple of small ones? Or had you always had in the back of your mind the big journey, what is it, 3,000 plus kilometers? Well, cycling from Glasgow to Istanbul. How far is that?
It was nearly 3,000 miles in the end.
Yeah. 3,000 miles. Yeah.
I did always think in the back of my mind, Dervla Murphy's book planted that seed that I was going to do a big adventure. And for me, it was initially the idea of cycling across a continent that just captured my imagination. I could not believe that you could, in a reasonably short amount of time, cycle across a whole continent on Earth, and she, of course, cycled across, I guess, 1.5, going from Ireland to India. So that was in my mind. It just that phrase, cycling across a continent, was in my subconscious, in the back of my mind, and I always thought I would do it. I thought I would do it later in life, actually. I thought when my children are grown up, this will be a nice retirement thing to do. And then for various reasons, life changes, redundancy, divorce, feeling a bit lost and trying to recapture who I was in a sense of myself. I thought, well, actually, here's something I've wanted to do for a really long time. I'm just not going to put it off anymore. That's how Glasgow to Istanbul came about. It's from home to a definition of the edge of the European continent, or the meeting of Europe and Asia. But it's funny, Sarah, because when you give yourself permission to go and do something that you've been thinking about for a really long time and almost feels like the ultimate bucket list adventure for yourself, that was the biggest thing on my bucket list. That was the most challenging and the scariest. And once I gave myself permission to go and do it, much earlier than I thought I would, immediately my brain, without me thinking about it consciously, immediately in my mind, something must have started whirring away. Oh, well, if you're doing this now, then what are you going to do next? And out of seemingly nowhere, but it must have come from somewhere, came this idea that if I kept going, where would be a meaningful endpoint for this journey from starting out from home? And it just came to me, I think, that actually the village that my grandfather initially emigrated from to the UK, and where my family and I guess, in lots of ways have come from, would be a really meaningful endpoint. And it would become a larger reverse migration from the place that we ended up settling all the way back overland to the place that we sort of came from. And that felt to me like a way of exploring my, mixed ancestry and my cultural heritage, and perhaps some of the conflict I'd been feeling growing up around, am I Pakistani, am I British, am I Scottish, what's the differences between these different identities, and where am I going to fit in, and will it feel different for me being in Pakistan, and how will I feel different, in the place that I grew up and still live? So that's how the longer journey came about.
Did you talk this out with anybody initially having that idea, or were you almost quite protective, not necessarily wanting it to be squished? Because sometimes I know if I've got an idea or a dream, I can be quite, I mean, not so much now. I think my confidence has grown so much. I'm literally like, yeah, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And everyone's like, okay. But I think initially when I first started out, when I would share certain things, I knew that I would only tell certain people because I knew I needed people to tell me, even though I sort of knew deep down, oh my God, of course you can do that. You'll be amazing. Da, da, da. Whereas if I think if a person just said, why would you want to do that? That's ridiculous. Like, oh God. And I hate even saying it, but you'd be by yourself and you're solo and you're so brave and you're not worried about blah, blah, blah. Did you need to get any confirmation, I suppose, from other people, or did you just set your mind on it and were like, no, no, I'm just going to do this. I don't need to sort of talk this through with anyone?
It's a really great question, and there's two elements to it, to the answer. One is I was discussing this with a very good friend of mine actually recently who I've known for 10 years. And I was asking him how he thinks I've changed over that time. He said he thinks I've moved from radical thought to radical action in the 10 years that he's known me. And that really made me reflect on this exact question, So I think 10 years ago, I would talk to anyone, friends, family. I would say, oh, this is so cool. I've just read this book and one day I'm going to do that. Or one day I want to do this. And they would sort of, nod along politely or roll their eyes or whatever, not necessarily take it seriously. And I would always phrase it as a very much, I'm going to, as a future thing, nothing concrete, just a dream rather than something I was planning to put into reality anytime soon. So I think my family and friends are really used to hearing me say, this is so cool, or that sounds great, and I'm going to go and do that, and not necessarily think that that means I'm going to take off the next day. I think in the last 10 years, as a result of the big life changes I mentioned earlier, you do then stop, don't you? And you reflect on who you are and what you want and what you might want now that's different from what you wanted before and who you want to be. And I thought I want to be someone who does these things now. I don't want to be someone that talks about them and gets to a point where maybe they're not possible anymore, or even more sadly, get to a point where I don't want to do them anymore. And that hunger's gone, and that drive is gone, and I never took advantage of it. So that's one aspect to the answer is, divorce, redundancy, all these things just made me, I think, move consciously from someone who talks about things to someone who said, no, I'm actually now going to go and do it. And for that part, I didn't really need to tell anyone. It was, I'd done all the telling before, and now it was like, no, I'm just going to go and do it. I told people, of course, that I was going to do it, but I didn't go and discuss with anybody whether this was a good idea. That decision was made in my own head. The other part of it, though, which was really crucial, was I won a grant from an organisation called Adventure Queens, and I'd applied for that just very quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I had just one day, it came up in a newsletter from Alistair Humphreys. I would recommend to anyone listening to sign up to his newsletters if you're interested in adventurous things. Just popped into my inbox one day when I was unemployed, and I opened it and I saw this link to the grant and I just immediately clicked on it. And really, for me that day, this was just something productive for me to do that day. Sometimes, I don't know if you've had periods of unemployment or anyone listening has had those periods where you just feel you need to do one thing in a day that makes you feel good about yourself because you don't have the dopamine hit of being at work, and being productive and all those things. So I saw this and I thought, okay, if I fill this in, this will be me feeling like I have done something with my life today. And I just did it. I genuinely don't think I actually read it through for grammar or spelling. I just wrote from the heart. It was like, okay, if I was going to do an adventure, what would it be? This is what I'm going to do. Press send and didn't think about it again. And then a few months later, actually in January last year, so almost exactly this time last year, I got the email to say, you're one of our 3 winners. And that was hugely encouraging. First of all, it meant, right, now I've got to go do the thing that I said I was going to do. I really have to do it. But it also came with, lots of support. I was allocated a mentor who'd been a previous winner. There was a bit of financial support, a really welcome injection of cash and some kit. And there was the platform that Adventure Queens had to help promote the adventure and help get some interest in it. So I think those two things together, it became more public facing, but I'd already decided at that point I was going to do it.
I just love it. It's just that radical action, isn't it? It's being so proactive. And to be honest, like taking these almost little steps, like initially signing up to the newsletter, clicking the open of an email, having a read, not overthinking, just being like, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to apply. Like, boom, don't even need to spell check, grammar check. Just don't overthink it. Write down what it is. You've got to be in it to win it. Send it off. Forget about it. And then suddenly winning the Adventure Queens grant. You know, what they do is so fantastic. I'll be putting all the links to the Adventure Queens. We've spoken to other winners before, and I just love, you know, hearing about their journeys and their trip, as do our listeners. But I suppose for you, it's suddenly now, this is a reality. You're going to have to make this happen. And in terms of that planning and preparation, how much time did you give yourself? Did you need to do a lot of planning and preparation? You know, what were your sort of concerns about getting yourself ready for this trip so that you felt prepared, if you felt prepared?
So I'm not going to hold myself up here as a as a role model when it comes to preparation. I'm going to tell you the honest truth though, which is the kind of person I am is I find it, and I don't know why, you know, I'd have to delve deeper into my psychology, but I find it much easier and preferable when I give myself a short time to prepare for things. You know, I can't imagine anything worse than having 2 years, for example, to prepare for a wedding. I mean, that to me is my absolute ultimate nightmare. And I've got friends and colleagues that do that and they say, I'm getting married in 2030 or whatever. And I've started looking at my venues and things. I just can't, you know, we gave ourselves 3 months to plan our wedding and then we did it. And it was very similar here. I had 3 months, almost exactly 3 months. I set off on the 4th of April and I found out in January, early January, that I'd won this grant. So I had 3 months to prepare. And I'd set myself the date of the 4th of April. You know, I could have left later in the summer, but I did it on purpose because I didn't need it to be perfect. You know, I didn't want to have endless preparation time so that anxiety would build up or I could have second thoughts about even going. You know, once I decided, once I'd won the grant, it was like, right, well, this is happening and it's happening as soon as I can make it happen. So I had about 3 months, which meant I left less prepared than I could have been, certainly fitness wise. You know, I'd just been through a winter. I hadn't thought this adventure was coming, so I hadn't been doing a lot of anything really to stay fit. And I suddenly had 3 months to plan the whole thing. So I left really very unfit, but that was almost a conscious, you know, I could have spent those 3 months in the gym, but because it was a long enough adventure, I thought actually either I spend loads of time getting fit beforehand or I just use the journey as a method of getting fit. And that's what happened. You know, each day I got fitter and fitter, and you're spending 8 or 9 hours on a bike each day. That just builds by itself. Other preparation, the key things were really plotting the route, making sure I had a way of navigating. So I had to learn how to use a Garmin, but actually I didn't even properly know how to do that before I left. I set off on the first day and I'd plotted my route into it and the Garmin just kept beeping at me the whole day. I mean, every 3 seconds it was beeping. I felt like I was going to go absolutely crazy. And I didn't realise till the end of the day when I got off that I just hadn't pressed the start button properly. So it was warning me. It was like, you're cycling, by the way, but you haven't pressed the start button for recording. So that first day was sort of lost. You know, I think the thing I've learned around preparation is you need to be less prepared than you think because you can resolve things on the way. The key thing is to get going, you know, so you can buy pretty much anything you need on the way. You can fix pretty much any issue that happens on the way. In terms of fitness and so on, you can get fit doing the thing, you know, unless you're trying to beat a world record or something where you know you've got to cover a certain number of miles from day one. If it's not that kind of adventure, if it's a self-propelled kind of, you know, self-directed, do it in your own time sort of adventure, which mine was, then you can get fit doing it and you'll get faster just by doing the thing. Other preparation, because I'd done long distance hikes and things before, I already had a sort of a solo tent. I had a little old stove and I had my old touring bike. So there was bits and pieces that I already had and knew how to use. I didn't go out and buy a lot of new stuff at all. So I would say the preparation was minimal. The actual thing that took me the longest, if I'm honest, was the online element of it. So because I'd won this Adventure Queens grant, I then felt I had to, you know, and part of the grant as well is, of course, sharing your adventure to help inspire other women to go and feel they can do these things. And that was also a really important part of it for me, to inspire people to go and do this, but especially people who feel like their face might not fit normally in the adventure world, you know, people who are not white, women who are have children or are mothers, or, you know, I was 36 when I set off, so not exactly, you know, a spring chicken in my early 20s, someone who's not been, you know, doesn't got a massive toned body and doesn't go to the gym all the time. So I was really keen to do that. And that was the bit that took the longest, was setting up a blog, writing the blog before I left, you know, reflecting on why I was doing this journey, reflecting on the preparation or lack of it, and then setting up an Instagram account. I wasn't on Instagram at all before I set off, but I wanted, there to be a way for people to follow along. So those were the things I think actually took the most time and thought and like careful reflection. And I'm really, really pleased that I did that. And I think I'd encourage anyone before you set off on an adventure like this to to spend time on that part, the reflecting and the thinking and the recording of like, why are you doing this? What are you hoping to get out of it? How can people follow along? And what are you hoping that people who follow get from your journey?
When you got on your journey, when did you, I suppose, almost like relax into it? When did it become like a new way of living? Did it get to the point where you just felt comfortable with this, the constant moving, the seeing new sights, visiting and exploring new places? When did it become almost like your new reality?
It took me 6 weeks. And I've thought about this carefully before. The whole journey was 2 months and it took me a long time. It took me 6 weeks to fully settle into what I would consider that nomadic mindset, as opposed to the mindset of living a sedentary, normal, settled life back at home. And the adjustment was huge. And it was the same on my return. I would say it probably took me about 6 weeks to then settle back into what a sedentary lifestyle and mindset feels like, and then feel comfortable back in that life as well. There's a lot being written about the difference between, sedentary and nomadic lifestyles and peoples, and the difference in your brain and the way it works. And I really, really noticed it. So I actually had an exam to do, believe it or not, when I was on the journey, which was luckily within the first couple of weeks. I was studying at that time part-time for an MBA with the Open University. And within 2 weeks, I think, of starting, I had this exam that I had to do online. And it was lucky that it was in that first 2 weeks, because I'm telling you, see, if it had been after 6 weeks, I actually wouldn't have been able to do it, because it's such a different way of thinking from when you're on the road. And as I say, my mind hadn't fully, relaxed into that nomadic lifestyle. But if it had, I just wouldn't have been able to do it. And I found even writing my blog an actual insurmountable challenge. And I know other people won't have this, but for me, after the 6 week point, I actually couldn't do that kind of reflection. I was writing a diary every day for myself to make sure I remembered, what was happening. I was taking pictures and putting a few on Instagram every day just to make sure everyone back home knew I was safe. But I couldn't do any proper deep sort of reflection while I was cycling every day. There was something about the energy that was required for that actually being used literally in my legs every day instead. It was all going to physically fuel the journey and experience it, and, be alert to danger and think about where I was going to sleep that night and what I was going to eat. And, eating became an hourly thing that I was thinking about. Every hour I had to refuel. So my mind was occupied by completely different things that don't preoccupy you in normal life. You don't have to worry about where you're going to sleep. There's food in the fridge. You don't have to be constantly thinking about what's going to be next, or be alert to your surroundings and danger potentially, or just, be alert to looking around at the changing landscape all the time in the same way. So hopefully that answers the question, Sarah.
It does, and it's so relatable. As somebody else who's done like long journeys, sometimes and you described it so beautifully. It's so difficult to describe to people like how brain dead you are, because if you think you're seeing all these new sights and sounds, and whether if you're meeting new people, it's that constant especially, for women, assessments like, is this a safe environment? Am I at risk if I stop here and pull in here to go for a wee? Who's behind me? Who's ahead of me? And then it can be the logistics. Okay, so I've got my food here. Where's the next place? Okay, I need to charge my battery pack. I definitely understand what you're saying. So one of the reasons I have, when I share my journeys, I have a set template that I follow with, with like the stats. So the distances, the day, what time I woke up, what time I finished. There's no other way for me to do it, because I can't, mentally, I'm so done in at the end of the day. It's really even hard to fill that in, because sometimes I'm so tired. It's just like, I just need to get my tent set up, blow my air mattress up, get into bed, let's sleep, close the eyes. If I forget for like 1 or 2 days, I struggle to remember. I'm like, what did I do yesterday? Where was I the other day? There's that energy that you're expending on just sort of moving all the time. But it's great that you did share it as well, because I don't know about you, but sometimes the days and the weeks can blur together and you can sort of forget like what's happened. But I'd love for you to share maybe, some of the magical moments, some of those experiences that you had while you're out on the road that made you think, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I wanted to experience.
Oh, it's a good question. It's also a difficult one, because it's probably not going to sound very impressive or wonderful, but in the moment it really is. And I think anyone listening who's done these adventures will know exactly what I'm talking about. These are almost ineffable moments on the road, right? So and you don't expect them. You don't know when they're coming. There was one moment where I just took a break, got off the bike, sat down on a bench, happened to be next to sort of a lake, a body of water, and I couldn't hear anything. There was no traffic, there was no people around. It was completely still. The sun was out, and there was nothing otherwise sort of special about that moment. But I will probably remember it forever as just an incredibly peaceful, almost spiritual moment where I felt like there was nowhere else in the world I wanted to be. I was in exactly the right place I was supposed to be in. And I just felt incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be there, even though I couldn't even tell you now where it was. It was nothing special in terms of even how it looked. Those kind of moments happened to me quite a lot. And especially after that 6-week mark, once I'd really relaxed into it, once the weather got better, once I was fitter and, the physical daily grind was getting less challenging, more and more of those moments of just gratitude and peace and joy, I think, started just happening almost by themselves without me having to chase them or find them. And just the daily action of getting on my bike and cycling was making them happen, or was perhaps making my mind more open to seeing what's always there. That's probably more close to the truth, that even in normal everyday sedentary life, we can stop and take a pause and take a moment to be grateful for what we have. But it's easier somehow, or it comes easier, I found anyway, on the road. So there was lots and lots and lots of those moments where just the beauty of the world felt more visceral, where I felt more alive, in the world, where I felt more at one with everything around me. Plenty of those. And then there was other moments of connection with people that I met on the way that are also very special. I used the website Warm Showers quite a lot, which is a bit like couch surfing, but it's for cycle tourists. And people offer their sofas or their homes for you to stay in for a night or two on your way. And these are almost always people who have done cycle tours themselves, so they completely understand kind of what you're doing, and they're often full of great advice around their local area or bike paths or other things. And I met some lovely people, and a couple of them actually really special moments where they would, the next morning when I was leaving, they took a couple of hours out of their day or a full morning and cycled along with me before turning back towards their homes. So that was beautiful. I loved the fact that people would do that. I loved having their company. I loved learning from them about their homeland and, the why they cycle tour and just about their lives. Like, those moments of connection were really important. And I think there is something around being a traveller which perhaps lets people open up to you, or lets you open up to people you meet on the way who are just complete strangers. You're going to be in each other's lives for a few hours, perhaps even less than that. But some of the things people told me or the way they opened up was quite special. So those moments will stay with me as well.
And it's also, I find as well, it is the kindness of strangers. Mm-hmm. It's just, people who, the Warm Showers host who open their home to you, who feed you, who give you a warm shower and, mm-hmm. Let you either camp or in the garden or give you a bed to sleep in and just, share stories and be supportive and encouraging. It really can make all of the difference. Traveling over to Istanbul, it's a long journey. What was the route that you decided to take? Which countries did you go through?
I went through 10 countries in the end. I'll try and list them all, but there's the UK. I went through a little bit of France, Belgium, Austria, Germany. I went through a tiny bit of Slovakia, just around the corner basically, and then into Serbia, Bulgaria, and eventually into Turkey. So hopefully I've not missed any. So there's 10 countries. I was really keen to make this a very personal route. The whole journey was incredibly personal. The start point and the end point were meaningful to me personally as a result of my own family history. And I was keen to maintain that throughout the route itself. So I deliberately planned it for the UK section to go through all of the places that I'd lived in throughout my life in the UK. So I went through Sunderland and Cambridge and London on my way out to Europe. And then on the way as well, I plotted using a mixture of, Eurovelo routes because they were well signposted and largely off-road, which was really helpful. I took a big detour to go to Basel in Switzerland. Oh, that's right, that's another country, because I had friends who lived there and I really wanted to see them. But mostly at that point, once I got past, places I'd lived or people who I knew, it was very much kind of, Eurovelo routes and the Danube cycle path, for example, which is absolutely fantastic. What a beautiful route. Once I got further east and south into Serbia and Bulgaria, a lot of those routes kind of petered out. There's not as many that way, or at least they weren't in the direction I wanted to go. So at that point, I just had to plot the sort of the straightest route. So I went straight through, almost in a straight line through those two countries to get into Turkey. And at that point, I was using more, it was roads rather than cycle paths. But yeah, before that, certainly I was trying to take the scenic route. So you can get across Europe from Glasgow to Istanbul in a lot fewer than 2,880 miles, which I think is what mine was in the end. But yeah, I wanted to take the scenic route.
When you reached Istanbul after 2 months, massive congratulations, incredible achievement. Were you ready to pause, to complete your part one? Or were you thinking, I sort of want to continue?
Yes, I was ready to stop. If I'm totally honest, I was ready to stop. I had done what I set out to achieve. And, maybe if I'd set in my mind, so much of this is mental, if I'd said to myself, no, my end point is, I don't know, Georgia or Tbilisi, quite probably I would have felt like I was ready to continue. But the end point for me for this journey was Istanbul. And the closer I got to it, the more ready I was to just be there, and for the achievement to have been done and to have a break from the bike and to see Istanbul. The other reason to choose Istanbul, yes, it's the classic melting pot and meeting point between East and West, but it was also a city I'd never been to before, and I was really keen to actually spend a good bit of time looking around it, which I did after I got off the bike. So yeah, I was ready to stop. But I do think largely that is just a mental thing rather than a physical barrier.
When you headed back home, had you got another job lined up, or did you know that you would be going into the charity sector to start working on Women on Wheels, or did that come after?
That came after. So I've been in the charity sector for a long time, doing various different roles. I wanted to spend the summer with my kids, so I did. I didn't want to take a job until they went back to school, which is in August in Scotland. So as soon as they went back to school, I then started looking for a job. And luckily, this interim project manager at Women on Wheels just happened to come up. I knew of the organisation anyway because I'd been for a maintenance class with them. Was one of my my low prep things that I did. I did attend one maintenance class before I left just to make sure I could fix a puncture, which in theory I can do, but in practice never had to. Throughout the whole 2 months that I was on the road, I very luckily didn't get a puncture. So no, I didn't have anything lined up. I also didn't want to commit myself before I left to something because a whole huge part of the journey was reflecting on what do I want to do and who do I want to be in this next phase of my life. And I didn't want to have committed my old self, if you like, to something which potentially wouldn't feel relevant or important to me on my return. So I'm really pleased that I did it that way. I also needed, as I mentioned before, about 6 weeks to actually relax back into normal life and feel comfortable and back at home and feel ready to really start thinking about what might be next. And we talked before about the kind of brain dead nature of constant physical exertion when you're on the road doing an adventurous trip. It took that amount of time for my brain to sort of come back online as well and really be able to think about what was next. So in the end, it all worked out.
Tell us more about the charity that you work for in Glasgow, Women on Wheels.
Women on Wheels is a fantastic small charity based in Govanhill in the south side of Glasgow. And our mission is to get women and families on their bikes, cycling as part of their daily life, but also doing more adventurous fun things like BMXing, mountain biking, cycle touring, if they so wish. So we really exist to help close that gap between the number of men and the number of women that you see when you're out there on the road. And we do a lot of work with teenage girls because we know from the evidence that when girls move from primary to secondary, there's a huge drop-off in how many of them then think that cycling is for them in any capacity. So it's a really fantastic charity. We do so many cool things, and it's about cycling, but it's about much more than cycling. Cycling is a means of transport. It's a means of getting exercise. It's so good for your physical and mental health. A lot of the women that come to us have other things going on in their lives. And for them, this can be a way of finding a community that's supportive, of finding some joy and health, and boosting their adventurous side as well. We'll find women coming with us doing BMXing who just could not have imagined that this is something they could do. We've got women coming to us who can't pedal at all and have never ridden a bike, and before you know it, they're off mountain biking. They can't quite believe it. So it's about far more than cycling.
I'll make sure I include the links to Women on Wheels in the show notes. And talk to us about part 2, which will be happening. Is that happening this year?
Yes, so in the end, I'm doing it in 3 parts. So part 2 of 3 will be happening this summer. I'm going to cycle across the Silk Road. So I'm going across Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, potentially into Kyrgyzstan as well. And then the following year, 2026, I'm hoping to then complete the the full reverse migration, pick up where I left off this year and head into Pakistan across the sort of through the corner of China and down the Karakoram Highway into Pakistan.
Oh, fantastic. Because you've done such a big adventure before and you obviously, you've got all your equipment and stuff, is there anything that you're changing or doing differently? Or are you just sort of like, well, I plan my route, I'm good to go. I've got the time off.
Yeah, this one will be quite different. It's going to be much more challenging physically. I'm crossing mountains and deserts and far more remote areas. It's going to be much hotter. Europe was great. You're never, I think, more than 5 meters away from a croissant, to be honest, at any point, or a great bakery selling amazing things. So this will be the next level challenge for me. So I am feeling like it's going to be tough. But as you say, I've done part one, so this feels appropriately adventurous. I'm not really going to do anything hugely differently. I'm just going to be aware that it will be a tougher sort of, journey because of the conditions and the terrain. I'll probably have to get some gravel tires on my bike, I think, because there won't be the lovely Eurovelo kind of paved off-road cycle routes of mainland Europe. But yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it.
What sort of places are you hoping to see on there? Is there any sort of particular stops you're like, yeah, that's the must-do see? Or is it more just about the whole sort of general experience?
Well, there's definitely some of the old Silk Road cities, Khiva, Bukhara, Samarkand, which I can't really believe I'm saying these names as places that I'm actually going to see this year. They feel like the stuff of legend and myth, which they are. But those are absolutely stops that I must make, and they are very much on the route that people tend to take when they're doing this journey across the Silk Road. So I'll be making those stops. Further east, it's a little bit more up in the air where I stop. I could stop in Tashkent, I could stop in Kyrgyzstan instead. So the last part I'm still sort of plotting that part of the route. So if anyone has any recommendations, I'd love to hear them.
And when's your start date?
It will be in the middle of July through to the middle of August.
Fantastic. And then so you'll fly back to Istanbul, is that right?
I'm going to fly. Yes, I'll fly to the start point. It might not be Istanbul, but I will. Yeah, I'll fly. This time I'll fly from to the start point, which will feel different because last time I just literally set off from my front door. But I guess that's the way of things when you're doing more remote parts of the world. So I'll be flying there and back.
And I imagine you'll be sharing it through your blog and your social media. And I'd love for you to share those links so that people can follow along and connect with you.
Yes, I'd love for people to follow along. So my blog is www.sasaonthemove.co.uk. And my Instagram is similar. It's at @sasa_on_the_move. I'd be delighted for anyone to follow along.
And so here, I'd love for you to share your final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women who are thinking, do you know what? I do want to take on a new challenge. I know I need to take some radical action to make things happen. What advice would you like to share? But please don't say, just do it. Any other advice apart from that?
The best piece of advice I've ever heard about how to get yourself actually out there doing the things you want to be doing rather than sort of just thinking or talking about them is to set a date for your start date. Whenever that might be, set it in your calendar, put it in bold and red and make it an absolutely non-negotiable start date. And once you've got that, everything else you can work backwards from. So that was pretty much what I did. Once I won this grant, I thought, okay, I've got the full year to use it, but I just set myself the 4th of April. I thought that's the start of the spring. For various other reasons, it was the start of the Easter holidays. It made sense for me and my children in terms of childcare. But I just set the date was the actual first thing. And then you work backwards. And planning backwards means that you fit in what you can in terms of planning and preparation. But if you do it the other way around and think, okay, I need to be 100% fully prepped and planned before I can set off, well, actually, that could take you years or decades because something else might always come up or there's always a way of being better planned and prepped. And I think that then becomes almost an insurmountable mountain to get across before you can get going. So my big piece of advice would be do it backwards. Set the start date and then whatever time you've got to prepare, use it, but don't move that start date.
Absolutely love it. Set that start date. Absolutely. Sahir, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your incredible cycle journey, and just best of luck with part 2. And it'll be fantastic to get you back on after you completed part 2 and part 3 and hear about the completion of your amazing dream and adventure that you're going on.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, tribe, how are you all doing? I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sahir. What an absolute inspiration. I love the fact that she's decided to take on this challenge, complete this journey, and do you know what? Make it work for her and her lifestyle, doing it in 3 parts, fitting it around work and her family. I absolutely love that. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. I'm also, I've got a big shout out happening. So super, super delighted. I have been a patron. I've just received a message. Esteemed patron supporter, I'm very pleased to be able to send your book reward for all your support during my journey. And I am talking about Ursula Martin. So Ursula has actually been on the Tough Girl podcast twice, but it's always such an incredible pleasure for me to be able to do shout outs and share other women's achievements. So Ursula, Ursula first came on the Tough Girl podcast on May 26, 2020, where she shared more about surviving ovarian cancer and walking 3,700 miles in Wales and more about her book. We then got Ursula back on the Tough Girl podcast on August 17th, 2021, where she shares more about her journey walking 5,500 miles across Europe from the Ukraine. So, since we last spoke to Ursula has been very busy writing her story, writing her journey. And in my hands, I am thrilled to be holding one of the first copies of her book, which is now live. It's called One Woman Walks Europe from Wales to Ukraine and back again. Ursula Martin. Louise Price has also been on the Tough Girl podcast, says a bold and thrilling journey from an exceptional writer. Absolutely love that. And I'm just going to read the back of the book to you. I felt at peace in the depths of darkness, listening to the slow clatter of single leaves falling. I was complete, both dissolved into the land and whole upon its surface. Join Ursula Martin on an epic 5,500-mile trek across Europe, walking and wild camping in remote landscapes. Along the way, she faces fear, exhaustion, and solitude, while discovering deeper connections with the world around her. Through her encounters with locals and fellow travellers, Ursula must confront her own limits and a longing for home. In this inspirational story of adventure, resilience, and transformation, she navigates the balance between independence and community, learning that sometimes the toughest journey can be found within. Oh, I'm getting thrills. But it's so amazing when you follow and support women and just see them going after their dreams and their ambitions. You know, Ursula's been walking and writing about her story. She shared on the Tough Girl podcast. I followed her journey across Europe, and now, to be able to hold her book in my hands, which is the result of so much hard work and effort. It's just incredible. So congratulations, Ursula. I'm so frigging proud of you. And for everyone listening, please do go check out One Woman Walks Europe from Wales to Ukraine and back again. Go and give the podcast episodes a listen and support Ursula as well, because we do want to hear more women's stories and more women's voices. I also just want to do a shout out to the publisher as well. So and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, it's spelled Honno. So I'm going to say Honno. So Honno is a Welsh women's press which was set up in 1986 by a group of women who felt strongly that women in Wales needed wider opportunities to see their writing in print and to become involved in the publishing process. Our aim is to develop the writing talents of women in Wales, give them new and exciting opportunities to see their work published, and often to give them their first break as a writer. Honno is registered as a community cooperative. Any profit that Honno makes is invested in the publishing programme. Women from Wales and around the world have expressed their support for Honno. Each supporter has a vote at the annual general meeting. And for more information to buy the publications, please visit the website, visit honno, honno.co.uk, or you can email them at post@honno.co.uk. Massive shout out to Honno, because I think that is a phenomenal thing to do. A community cooperative, promoting women's voices, getting women's stories into print, because obviously, it's so difficult to get their women's voices out there and women's stories told. And so I just love this. So I love what you're doing. The Honno's Welsh Women's Press, set up in 1986. Incredible work. Thank you so much for supporting Ursula. Please do go check out their website as well and support as much as you can. I'm obviously a big believer in promoting and supporting women, so it's just great to give these shout outs. If you're interested in learning more about me and the work that Tough Girl Challenges does, and more about the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges, then please visit toughgirlchallenges.com. If you're in a financially stable place at the moment, then please consider signing up as a patron, patreon.com/toughgirlpodcast. It really does make a massive difference having, regular support every single month. Otherwise, if you could just tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast, that also makes a massive difference. But thank you so much for listening. And all that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all. Give it 110%. Get after it. Go for it. Believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care. Lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.